Melanie, I did see a countdown, five, four, three, two, one, and
Yeah,
it looks like it's just live on YouTube.
it's just not gone live on the actual LinkedIn live bit that it's supposed to go live to. Oh, oh, it is. It's working now. Yeah, it's working now. Hello, hello, and good afternoon, everyone. Oh, I'm so sorry. We've just had our usual tech issues. If John and Rick, if you want to come up, we love. Oh, honestly, this has been like. I love a gadget, and I love new software, and I get really excited. So this is good that I'm talking to some software people. But on the other side of things, when it's not easy, oh my god, it stresses me out, and I just feel like the older. Should I say that? Should I just feel like my mum? But anyway, so I think it's all working now. It looks like it's all working now. Anyway, thank you for joining us with today's LinkedIn Live. I'm really happy to say we have some very professional people with us today. We have our wonderful Rick Hamill, and we also have John Riley, both from Helios. So, for those of you that do not know Rick, Rick, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. And before we had our Twitter meltdown situation, Melanie, you handled it perfectly. So thank you for getting us on board. So Rick Hamill, founder and CEO of Helios. We're here focusing on automated and more simplistic way to manage your global workforce in 125 plus countries. That's kind of thinking about the entire journey. So from onboarding to offboarding and everything in between, really you're all in one global workforce management platform. So thank you again, Melanie, for having me. And I'm going to do a quick shout out to say I'm super excited. We just announced that we completed our ISO 27001 certification. So we're super excited that we got that today. But thank you.
Ah, congratulations! That's good news. So today's a good day.
It is.
And we have John. So, John, this is the first time that you have joined us. So, great to see you here. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. I'm glad to be able to join. So my name is John Riley, head of global payments at Helios. I've been in financials and background in banking services for over 15 years, predominantly in banking and payments, and then moved into the fintech sector and joined Helios recently. But in the last number of years, I've been focusing on payroll and the execution of payments for the payroll industry and trying to digitize that kind of sector. So glad to be able to join today and go through some details with you guys.
Fab. And thank you for everyone that's joined us today. And Ria, thank you for joining us. We have Ria is a regular on our session, and she already knows what I'm going to ask everyone, and she's already told us where she's logging in from. So Alabama, USA. So thank you, and it would be great to hear where everyone else is logging in from today. So because I do love it that we do actually have a global audience. So today, as we said, we're going to be talking about global contractor pay and how to make payments timely and efficiently and compliantly. So one of the things that I've been slightly obsessed with is how payments has come into the spotlight even more so since CrowdStrike. So one of the things that I don't know if you guys saw, but the GPA had quite a lot of traction with the media, and it was focusing around payroll. But actually, the interesting part was the payments. That was potentially the issue. So I think more than anything, I think payments is becoming more complex, and it's really hitting the headlines. So yeah, so on the geeky side, I was like, oh my god, this is so good that we're doing this session because of what's been going on over the last few weeks. Um, so what are the most common challenges companies face when paying global contractors? Who wants to answer that one?
I'll start, and John, definitely your opinion is really important here. So, I think from an HR perspective and a payroll perspective, it's one making sure it's done compliantly. One of the biggest nomenclatures with contractor payments is misclassification. So, are they really an employee or are they a contractor? and then two, how are they getting paid, how those payments are getting into those particular countries, and what type of currencies that they're collecting. So it's a number of things, but I would say from an HR perspective, it's typically misclassification and making sure it's done compliantly. Also, how payments are issued by the bank. That kind of that classification of how that payment's being received by that contractor can create some issues depending on the country of how they actually are receiving money, especially if it's foreign money, and how they are how compliant that is and what they have to do to register those incomes. So, for example, we've seen where money going to Brazil, every country likes money coming in, but how do you actually report on that particular income? If you're not a business, if you're an individual, what does that mean? What does that look like from a tax ramification? And then obviously comes into the compliance complexity regarding the employee and their status and their classification. John.
Yeah, and on the global side of things, as you start to try and pay into different countries and different jurisdictions, while the complexity on the HR side is there's also similar complexity then on the actual payment rails and paying international payments. So while it's leaving from one country and going in one currency, you have different banks and different kind of jurisdictions that you have to pay into. So the speed at which they're processed, the currency conversions, the FX rates, there's lots to consider when you're actually paying across borders and into different countries. So that can show some of the complexity of how there might be multiple legs within the journey. So it might have to go from one bank to another bank to another bank. And it's trying to see how you focus on streamlining that activity to allow for a more simplified process that's cheaper for everybody and more transparent.
Yeah, John, you mentioned the cheaper component of that. So when you're talking about payment rails going between multiple banks, every bank's going to want their fee. So how can organizations kind of think about that and streamlining those type of payments to make sure that they're doing it efficiently, quickly, and more cost effectively?
Yeah, and compliantly too, to make sure that we have all of those different boxes ticked. Because ultimately everything is kind of moving towards a more faster rail system. So you'll see now in the UK, you've got faster payments and you've real-time payments in the US and SEPA payments that are trying to speed up those faster rail types. But then you've also got payment providers like ourselves who are trying to streamline all of those different complexities to make it that it's actually a one-stop shop so a one payment, one click kind of payment rail, and to make sure that you have transparency in showing where exactly those payments are and how quickly they can get there through these faster networks and not relying on the old banking infrastructure to have those additional costs, and ultimately streamlining the process, making it cheaper and more efficient for everybody involved.
One of the things that I find really bizarre, I don't know if that's the right word, is that there is so much complexity around paying people, and I'm finding out more and more as we go along. So, we were talking to payment companies 5 years ago, and, I didn't really understand so much of the complexities. And now, especially since COVID, where do people find out? How do people find out about the country complexities, or do you have to rely on a provider or people like yourselves?
Yeah, for ourselves, like we're able to highlight the different issues and the norms that happen in the different jurisdictions, so we can explain exactly how they're currently dealing with those processes today and how we aim to simplify those processes. Because for me, in payments in particular, in a payroll world and in a contract payment world, all of this should happen seamlessly under the hood, that nobody can see it, and it should effectively come to a one click. Everybody wants to make sure that the money goes into their account, and that's the main thing. Once you do your work and you want to get paid for it, it should happen seamlessly and easily without anybody ever having to see the complexity underneath all of that. And that's where we come into play, to actually remove that complexity, be transparent of where the payments are and how the money flows, but ultimately making it easier for the administrators on one side, and then the actual the recipient on the other side, to make sure that they can see exactly where it is at all parts of the journey, and ultimately speed up that process for everybody involved.
Yeah, not only I think that because what we've also found is that a number of people or departments are involved in contractor payments, that creates a lot of complexity as well, and also creates a lot of delays. So streamlining that process, one, it's not just how the money gets out the door, but it's also what is your actual internal processes of reviewing signing off, and then go ahead and approving those payments. Streamlining that process is something that we focus on at Helios as well, is allowing a client to have kind of one pane of view where a contractor can upload their invoices, finance can approve them, and then you can click that payment. I think it's really important. So sometimes, and again, I want to caveat this by that it's important that you have the right classification, but as companies are expanding to certain countries, they do leverage the contractor model to be able to quickly get someone on board while they're actually establishing themselves or deciding what they're doing in these particular countries. When they're doing that, they sometimes don't realize the complexity of what needs to set up. And I'll give an example. There are a number of countries like India, China, Brazil, just to name a couple, that getting money into those countries can create some work, and also what that employee actually nets. So understanding the rules and having a partner that really can streamline that for you and make sure that you understand what you're sending and what's going to be received by that contractor allows you to have a lot more simplistic and more semiotic kind of relationship with a contractor. One of the biggest things that I've seen happen with contractors is that someone says, for simplistic numbers, someone sends $100 and the contractor receives 90. And they said, hey, there's a discrepancy with my invoice. Having a partner that can tell you that, hey, there's going to be a fee associated with this, or how to make sure you set up that payment to ensure that the contractor actually nets the exact amount that's on their invoice or whatever services that you agreed with, that is something that's really important. And that's, to be honest, some of the easiest mistakes that we find, and creates a lot of frustration for contractors when they're actually receiving payments, especially in a global perspective.
And do you think like automation is going to be a key player in reducing errors and in ensuring timely payments? Do you think, we talk about automation loads, don't we, and AI, do you think that that's going to be the biggest thing really for payments?
So I jokingly say this all the time on these LinkedIn lives, but I want my platforms to do all the administrative work. I wanted to do my laundry, all the things I don't want it to do, right? So I wanted to do the administrative work. I wanted to be able to make sure it can QA me, it can give me a quality assurance and QC me to make sure I'm putting the right information in. So yes, I think AI and automation will allow it to do that. It will speed up the process behind that. It'll allow you to avoid some mistakes. Mistakes are bred typically when you have multiple manual processes and multiple people that they having to touch something. So I'm putting something into a system, then someone downloads it and put it into their system. We're human. There's opportunity to make mistakes there. If you have a system or a workflow that allows you to still have the same checks and balances that you have within the organization, but through certain clicks or verifications or quality controls, that allows you to be more simplistic. And if you have a lot of the back end, as John has indicated, built in. So look, I'm in HR. I don't need to know every single payment rail. I don't need to know every single additional fee that I may be charged depending on where I'm sending money in the world. I just need to know that when I put it in, I need to know what it's going to cost me. I need to know that it's going to get there and when it's going to get there. And so if you create a workflow that allows you to do that, it streamlines the entire process. And if you have a workflow that does it ahead of time, meaning the workflows that you use for approvals within your organizations, it just makes things a lot easier, and it minimizes complexity regarding compliance, and minimizes the complexity regarding accuracy, and it makes sure you can speed up the process to make sure it's done successfully. John,
Yeah.
Any feedback on that?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with all of that as well. And I think it's just the automation process itself and having the underlying APIs that can make it consistent across multiple jurisdictions and multiple currency conversions and multiple countries. That's just the addition to everything that Rick said, is all of that can happen seamlessly, and that automation, it doesn't need to be at the forefront of everything, just of how it moves will obviously help the administration team, but removing all of those manual touch points is the key to making it easy for everybody.
Yeah, Melanie, we did some beta testers and feedback from a number of individuals who are going to be using our contractor solution, and one thing they said that is that fee that they weren't aware of. So we talked about sending $100 and a contractor getting $90. They said their biggest pain point is having to figure out how to reimburse that contractor for that fee, because it's not on the invoice, it's not on the purchase order, and so it creates a lot of additional work. And it really could have been resolved if they had the right partner, or there was more transparency in what it actually will cost to make sure that someone netted exactly what they were supposed to get on their invoice. And so that complexity, that what we're trying to solve is how to avoid that, how to avoid those additional work steps that you have to take just because you didn't have the information how to do it. So we're very much focused on automating that so that you can avoid the additional work and delays that may cause because you don't have visibility to those payment rails or fees.
And we've tipped on compliance. What are the legal implications for non-compliance for in-contractor payments?
So we have an hour, right? So there's, I mean, I think compliance it's a broad statement, but I mean, it really depends on kind of where you're looking at. I'll bring it from a people conversation. John definitely bring it up from a payments complexity perspective. But the biggest one that I look at for contractor payments is misclassification. That comes up quite often, and when you are, there's never an issue when everyone's happy, right? No one, I always say when you're getting into a contract with a contractor, always negotiate your divorce before you get married, right? And so walk into the process, really understanding what roles and responsibilities are. Make sure you understand the fine line between employee and contractor. There was a situation that came up with a prospect that we're talking to today where they were told that they can bring on contractors. Actually, they were employees first, then they were converted to contractors. Someone told them they could do that. That was not necessarily whether it was necessarily illegal. And then one of those contractors actually went on maternity leave. And they said they were entitled to maternity benefits. And the, the employer came back and said, actually, no, you're not. You're a contractor. And so when you're not working, we're not going to pay for that time. Well, that contractor went back to the country and said, actually, I'm entitled. They actually filed a claim. And it opened up a can of worms for that particular prospect because they said, we were told by our provider that we can do this. It was actually not compliant. And then what ended up happening was that the employer was actually responsible for all the back pay that came with for taxes, benefits, and everything they were entitled to. They had to pay that, including the employees' contributions, by the way. And then they also had, they were fined, and it was a really big scar on them, and then they had to go through the entire administrative process of re-engaging those contractors back to being employees because that was what they should have been in the first place. So that misclassification piece is really probably the biggest issue that I find with compliance is making sure if you're going to hire contractors, understanding the rules and regulations behind that, and what type of risk you're bringing onto the business. Because if something goes wrong, and you always got to think about what happens when something goes wrong, what that looks like, and how that can actually impact your overall business from a people strategy and compliance strategy.
Yeah, and I suppose from the transactional side, then it's maintaining those records, making sure that you have visibility of all those payments that you've made, and even whether it's the contractors, whether it's any bodies that you need to pay in those different jurisdictions, that you have an easy accessible repository to make sure that you can validate that those payments have been executed and executed on time in a timely fashion, and making sure that those storage capabilities have the support and the requirements to allow you to fulfill audit requests and compliance requests as they come up.
I will say, I feel like I do want to go on a rant about the misclassification. I mean, there are huge well, not huge articles. There are articles of huge organisations that happened. Maybe I think was it a year or 2 years ago, where you can Google and find out what could potentially happen if you get it wrong. But the issue also is that some providers are encouraging people to change their permanent employees onto contractor contracts. And I just think people really do. I mean, I hope, like, our audience are pretty savvy, and I think if you ever have a provider saying move your staff over onto contractors, you really do need to question that, and actually from your own perspective, not because they've said it, but you need to make that decision to look after yourself.
Yeah, we're finding a lot of, when we're having conversations with prospects, we're actually converting a lot of contractors to employees for that very reason. They understand that. And again, look, I understand where it's a temporary solution to make sure that you're onboarding somebody really quickly, you're looking to set up an entity or work with like an employer of record. That makes sense because it's a temporary kind of solution, but a temporary solution should not be a permanent resolution. And I think that's where companies get they get comfortable with. They go, oh, it's not that expensive. We're not paying the taxes. We don't have benefits. But you have to remember that what happens when that contractor goes on maternity leave or paternity leave, or when they're entitled to certain things. Another one that comes up is tax payments. Independent contractors are responsible for paying their own tax payments, but if for any reason they don't pay it, we saw this happen as well, where an independent contractor came back and said they were supposed to withhold taxes from me. They were supposed to remit taxes. That's why I didn't pay my taxes. And as you know, with any government agency, they're always going to go after the people who have the deepest pockets. So some of those are clauses that you will put into a contract, but you have to remember that if someone says, well, technically I was an employee, and here's my proof that I was an employee, and some agency determines that based on what they were doing, they were an employee, and you had responsibility to pay them as a as a employee, and withhold those taxes, you can also be responsible for that. So the payments, it sounds easy, and I think that's important, but having the right partner who can help you navigate that complexity and compliance is really important, and making sure that you're setting yourselves up for success. So when we talk about payment rails, I give kudos to John on our team because he's done a phenomenal job at making sure that we are, one, compliant, make sure that we've got the best payment rails and the fastest payment rails. But we've also looked in our platform and making sure that like misclassification questionnaires and verifications are in our systems and helping customers understand what it means to be a contractor. There is an approach. We sell the service contractor pay, so there are opportunities to be a contractor. But the question yourselves are when, how, and time frames that you want to put these people in place. The number one thing is making sure you do it the right way, making sure that payments get out, and making sure that people pay on time. Another thing that you have to also be conscious about with payments, and John, please definitely talk about this, is also your possibility of creating nexus in a particular country because you're paying either a contractor or an employee in that particular country as well. So I'm not a tax accountant, but I also recommend when you're starting to bring on contractors, definitely think about engaging a tax accountant to get clarification of what type of ramifications that would be for your business as you're operating and now sending money into a particular country. And depending on what that individual is doing, there could be some tax ramifications for you as you're operating in those particular countries as well. So I always definitely give you that advice to take a look at that. And when I say Melanie advice, I say I've got the cuts and bruises in the background because of that experience and mistakes that I've made in the past. So I think it's really important to ask questions and ask a lot of questions as you kind of go through this process and making sure you're doing it the right way.
And what do you think is the best practices for setting up a payment system that caters for a global contractor base? What are the best practices?
Yeah.
In setting up in setting up and making sure that you have the requirements that you need to execute the payments. Like you need to look at the jurisdictions that you have, where you're going to fund from, where that funding flow is going to go, how you want to supply the money, so whether it's going to be in local currency, whether it's going to be an FX involved, and see where that flow of funds is going to be for your different jurisdictions in different countries. And that provider then, like ourselves, who are able to take it in any denomination and then being able to disperse it across those multiple countries and do it timely and effectively. That's the kind of the main processes that I think when companies are assessing who they need, it's making sure that it covers all bases for them, for all of their different, like contractors is one part of it, but they may also have some payroll needs, and they may also have some EOR needs, and it's making sure that the company itself can encompass all of those different things to ensure timely execution of payments for each of their different parties who need to be paid.
One of the issues that we have as a global organisation, and again, this is obviously, we have members all around the world, and I'm learning stuff all the time. Interesting stuff, and sometimes it's a little bit hard. But one of the complexities is actually the currency exchange rates. Just getting my head around that. So how do you handle that complexity? Because actually, there are ways that you can save money if you. And bank charges and the FX rate. If you're I'm not saying that I'm a smart cookie because I don't always get it right, But I know there are ways where if you've got a handle on the currency exchange, you can get better deals, or So what's the complexities there? What would you say to people about that?
Yeah, and I think transparency is one of the main things of being able to present those FX rates at a timely rate, and actually being able to visualize those up front, so people can make decisions real time whether they want to use the current rate that's on offer, or whether they want to hold on for an extra few days. Or you also have the opposite side of it, where you can fund a global account, and you can actually fund in different currencies at specific times and specific rate fluctuations. You'll be able to see them in the market. You'll be able to make timely decisions of when, and that's when your treasury team will come into play as well, that they'll want to make those fast execution times to make sure that they're being as prudent as possible when they're actually making those currency conversions. So you're dead right, Melanie. Like there's obviously opportunities to win and lose when you're dealing with FX rates, and having that visibility up front in a platform to show you the actual FX rates that you're going to be processing it at. I think that's the key to allowing people to make the right decisions at the right times.
Whose job is it to keep an eye on it? Like which department would it be? Would it be yourselves, or would it be treasury within your own department, or would it be the payroll leader who keeps an eye on the FX rates?
In a normal circumstance, it'd be the treasury team who would be able to monitor and see exactly what the rates are, and they'd be managing the balances of the funds flowing in and flowing out. So that's where it normally sits.
I do try, and I don't get it. I feel like I need to do like a course on it, but there are definitely advantages. And what are the key factors that contribute to timely payments for global contractors? Because as I think Rick said, you've got to pay people on time, haven't you? So yeah, how do you make that happen?
Yeah, it's the processes that Rick touched on earlier. So having that processing, like showing how it goes from start to finish. So really simply for the administrator at the front end, for the contractor themselves, as they upload, they'll see when the upload needs to be executed. They'll see when the administrator has actually processed the payment itself, and then seeing the streamline of funds in that process. So as soon as it's approved, it goes straight into the process to make those real-time payments. And when you have it all set up in the initial part, that the setups are done from both the company and the contractor, it allows the payments to be made really, really quickly without any real touch points once it's set up correctly in the first place. So actually managing that process, having it visible to everybody, and then being able to see the actual updates as it passes through the process flow, I think that's how it improves the journey for everybody.
Yeah, I think adding to that as well, I think understanding kind of timelines accordingly. So what we typically do is we break out currencies by major, minor, exotic, and so we understand what can be done same day or next day. We understand what can be done in a couple of days, and what can be done in a couple. It takes a little bit longer. So understanding kind of how do I put process and procedures in place based on the status of that particular currency or the classification of that particular currency, I think is really important, as well as payroll individuals or HR professionals. As we look at that, understanding that, hey, what helps me is what's a key flag that I know that I need to pay attention to. So if it's major, I'm like, oh, I can do that pretty quickly. I know that's gonna be simplistic. If it's exotic, I know that, hey, I need to make sure I'm being as proactive as possible to make sure that I can get these done. So understanding how to do red flags, understanding how to view policies and understand it. You don't have to be a treasury guru to really understand the complexities of money movement. But just kind of set kind of notes for yourself on understanding, hey, these are quick notes or tips that I can understand and maybe think about workflows, payments, and complexity based on those, like for example, those classifications.
And again, going back to CrowdStrike, going back to COVID, these were obviously risks to actually getting people paid. Are there any other risks associated to global contract payments, and how can companies mitigate them?
Yeah, so on some of the risks, like you will have systemic risks where you will have the actual push of the funds, or if the company is paying out of the banks, and making sure that you can actually have funding in place early to allow to make the payments. And you've also got some of the different key systemic issues that we probably would have seen in the last number of months, where you could have a technical failure, and having those protocols in place to have speedy turnarounds and ensure that you have backup plans to allow for the payments to be made in an emergency situation.
I think another thing you guys remember it was a couple of years ago with Silicon Valley Bank, where there was some risk behind the bank itself, and so understanding who you're partnering with, and understanding how money movement is going to impact you as well. I think those who had banked with SPV, they realized that they were requesting payments to be issued, but the bank was actually not issuing them due to their solvency. So making sure when you're partnering with a particular organization or particular fund, it's important that you kind of do your due diligence as well to make sure that they actually have the ability to do that. FX partners are typically taking your money and then they're pushing it out. But if you're also working with certain banks, there can be some complexities like that. I typically say partner with larger banks or larger funds or larger partners for that because they've got a lot of money movement going back and forth. And if you're working with a provider like a Helios, it's important to ask like who you're partnering with to make sure that you understand the solvency of kind of what's going on with your money movement.
And actually, that's a situation I actually forgot about, and it was a huge situation, wasn't it? And as things are changing again worldwide financially, that is a really serious point, isn't it? Look who you're partnering with. The other issue, or the other thing that we've been talking about quite a lot over the last few weeks, is to ensure that you have a contingency plan. So I suppose that's coming back to who you're partnering with. If a situation does happen with a bank or whatever, how important do you think it is to have a contingency plan? Not only the payroll side, but particularly on the actual payment side.
Yeah, I'll add to that just from a business owner perspective and an HR perspective. Um, I have seen where payments did not get issued on time. And there's complexities that come with that if you're using multiple rails or your provider's using multiple rails. At the end of the day, employees or contractors have to get paid on time. And so it's always important to have a plan A and a plan B, and making sure whoever partner you work with has a plan A and a plan B to make sure that happens as well. Just because of the complexity we've seen in the past, if someone gets stopped, again, especially when you're going to certain kind of exotic type countries and currencies, sometimes there's some restrictions behind that or the amounts that can be received by individuals that can actually be stopped or flagged by regulatory organizations or governments. And so it's important to say, okay, if this gets stopped, how fast can you turn around and resolve that situation? You also want to have a partner. I believe that I'd rather pay a little bit early than ever late. And so we make sure that because every bank's a little bit different, I'll give an example. Credit bank or union credit banks in the U.S. are a little bit different than traditional commercial banks, and they typically release funds a little bit earlier and sometimes a little bit later. And so because you have these variables that really on a bank by bank basis, it's important that you kind of say, okay, how do I make sure employees always get paid on time? And so there has to be testing, there has to be kind of work through. You have to also see limitations, ask the right questions. What's the most amount of money I can send in a particular country for a contractor that's not going to get flagged? Or if it does get flagged, what's the turnaround time? And what are possible delays that you've seen? Ask those questions. I always say this on these calls. Ask 1,000 questions to make sure you understand the complexity behind that and how you can partner and make sure your partner understands how to help navigate that so you're proactively thinking about things within the business. We had a situation in the past where I had a client who paid a very large bonus to an employee. Luckily, that was in a major currency, but it was a bonus over $1 million. And when they issued that, the first couple of things we were asking them was, hey, well, we want to make sure this is going out, but we're going to do some vetting really quickly to make sure that there's not going to be any delays. And if there's any delays because of this large payment, we want to make sure that we're proactively communicating with the employee. It could be delayed. Luckily, there was no delay. We were proactive. They got it on time. It was great. But we had that conversation with our client so that they understood that there's some risk associated with that, where they were actually moving that large sum of money to an individual.
Yeah. And I think most of the times, Melanie, when there's payments disruptions, they can be preempted in a number of instances. So while some are unavoidable at the end, the majority of things I think can be actually preempted. So making sure that everything is set up correctly in the first instance when you're gathering the payment information, making sure that you have strict structures in place to make sure that they're correct, then testing those, making sure that the rails that you're using are pre-tested, then the actual information that you're using then to make the payments is tested, and doing all that up front. It makes everything easier in the long run. So it's just that consistent basically testing and frameworks that are in place to ensure that you have a seamless execution.
I think transparency and communication seems to be like the two, and consistency, three words: consistency, transparency, and communication seems to be really important. And I actually I don't think I've ever heard of anybody actually contacting their client to say, this is a big sum of money, let's get this sorted and let's make sure everyone is aware. And so that's really good. I think that is really important.
Well, proactively, when you proactively think about that, you set expectations up front versus, hey, we sent the money, we sent it to you, you sent it out, where to go? You never want a client to call you and say, we sent you $1 million, where's it at?
Yeah.
So being as proactive as possible, those particular flags, like for example, we can see within our system, we know that we need to take those particular steps to reach out to our customers to validate and have those conversations with them. But it's just based on experience, right? We understand that things like that can be delayed. Another thing is that when things break out, like wars, we see a number of wars that have been broken out, or unrest in certain countries. Making sure that you are thinking about, okay, if I've got employees there or I've got contractors there, what impact is this going to have in my money movement component? I think, again, being proactive in those conversations. And also, certain countries are also restricted from actually doing money movement. It's called a sanctions list. So understanding, I'll give an example of that. If you have employees in Venezuela, U.S. companies cannot do business in Venezuela just because it's on our sanction list. Iran is another country like that, but Europe doesn't have those same restrictions. And so making sure you understand, hey, I know that you guys are a U.S.-based company, or I know you're a European-based company. These are the sanction requirements or lists that you can't operate in. Walk me through what you recommend if we're going to partner with you guys here, or is there something that we need to establish ourselves because you don't have the ability to do that? Again, being proactive in those conversations is really important, because ultimately you want a partner that's going to it's going to be compliant, and making sure that they're proactively working with you to make sure that they're providing a solution, not only picking up the call to fix a solution, but actually providing something that's going to be successful for your overall business.
And that's a really good point on the war side, because when the Ukraine and Russia situation happened, people needed to pay people in Russia. People had colleagues in Russia, and people were like, well, if I go here and pay it here, can I pay them? And we had a specialist on the call, and they're like, unless no, if you want to go to prison, then you do that. But because this is what a sanction's all about. And I think initially, if you haven't come across that, you don't realise how serious the sanctions are. So you really do need to have experts in your corner with those situations that will keep you out of trouble, really.
Yeah, I'll give an example of the Russia situation, because I had that situation at a previous one of my previous organizations, and it was very complex, right? At a moment's notice, where there's rules and regulations that go in that restricted the overall ability to send money in, or it made it very difficult. And there were certain licenses, specifically for the U.S. companies, we had to obtain from OFAC to be able to do that. So one, we were authorized to do it, but we were authorized to do it at a limited amount. We had a lot of employees in Russia at that point, and so we were trying to figure out how to support our customers. And we did the same thing. We went, okay, what if we send it here and we send it there? What if we send it there? But what we really did was we partnered with our customers and set the proper expectations with them to make sure that it was done correctly. And that's where a lot of this feedback is coming from, is things happen, the world changes, and having the right partner that's going to sit down with you and walk you through that and make sure that you do it correctly. Contractors are again, a thin line between employee and contractor. You want to have the right partner that's really walking you through that, and not just walking through the complexity of the status and misclassification, but how to make sure that payments go out on time and it's consistent for those particular contractors and it's compliant.
So we're coming sort of like towards our natural end of our. I mean, like, we could talk about this a lot for a lot over an hour, I reckon. But I just want to know. I've got a couple of questions to finish off with. What are the emerging trends for global contractor payments? Are there any? Because it's a big topic.
Yeah. I think like the payments in general is an ever expanding world, and it's moving away from traditional banking services and broadening that out to make sure that that global element is picked up, because all of those countries that we talked about earlier, like the likes of paying in, say, the likes of Argentina or Brazil, or are moving money to those places and having contractors having that ability to receive their funds. It's not just a traditional bank movement anymore, and to reduce that complexity, things are starting to move more and more real time. But then you've also got the other element of paying in global wallets and paying onto cards, and that seems to be a big trend that's focused at the minute. And that also accompanied then by the likes of cryptocurrency. So you're starting to see phases of different types of currencies and payments having that ability to do those, to make cross-border payments really seamless and easy. But I think at the moment it's the speed of the transaction itself, and then being able to move into those digital wallets and cards to be able to be paid onto a digital card and make payments themselves. That seems to be a trend that's upcoming in 2025.
Yeah, we're finding that companies want to be able to create a great experience for contractors and employees, but we also find that people want it done faster. Every day we're in this industry, it's how, look, I need more time to get it done in my business, so how do I make sure I get it to you at the last minute, but you can still process it on time? So faster turnarounds, faster flexibility, more flexibility, not faster flexibility, more flexibility, and making sure that there's options. People want options. One size doesn't fit for all. So making sure that, hey, I want to make sure I have my plan A, B, and C, so I can give my contractors options behind that. And then how do I make sure I can still follow the same process on this side to make sure all three of those options can be executed. So that flexibility is really important. I'll also say it changes based on the industry. It changes based on the region. Some cultural nuances. We just had some conversations where how people want to be paid through like WeChat in Asia, or people want to be able to use typical, like some companies don't use credit cards, or some countries don't use credit cards, or they try to shy away from credit cards. So what are the payment methods like a Stripe, like a PayPal, that they can leverage and that are local, because not everyone uses PayPal, not everyone uses Stripe, but like a localized approach to that fits within their culture and what they're used to, like a WeChat, that can be implemented. So those are things that we're looking at and expanding on, because we want to make sure that we're thinking about it not just from a global perspective, but a local perspective, meaning global but local, and making sure that employees have that experience or contractors have that experience and flexibility that they need to be able to receive payments.
So moving forward then, if you are looking for a global contractor payment provider, what advice would you give people? Because there's more companies coming into the industry. Yeah, what should people look out for?
Yeah, I think one is understanding their methodology. You don't want a provider who's going to tell you that you can convert all your employees into contractors. I think that's one. Making sure you don't hire a yes company. And when I say yes company, meaning someone that's just going to say whatever you want, we'll figure out how to do. You want someone that's going to really walk through and help provide solutions to your problems. I like to say you want a painkiller, right? You want someone to provide you a painkiller solution. And then you also want to make sure someone really understands the complexities behind that. So, what countries are you operating in, or where do you have contractors? How are you operating? What's your payment schedules, and what type of currencies are you paying them in? And some of that, as John indicated, may not be traditional currencies. It may be like a cryptocurrency. So, what flexibility? What's the rules and regulations behind that, and how can they help do that? And then automation is key. Workflows and automations really, there's lots of studies out there that show that that has been the most cost effective way, it's been the most efficient way for organizations, and it's been the most compliant way for for organizations to actually get payments out the door to contractors. And so making sure they have the right technology behind it to support you and try to avoid manual processes in the background. That's what I would probably ask or say that you probably should be asking. John, any thoughts on?
Yeah, and I'd agree that the step-by-step process and understanding exactly what's underneath everything that goes on, because often some things seem like they're automated, but they can be manually led, but making sure that you have that streamlined approach to support both the people who are managing all of those different payments and the people who are receiving it as well. And just making sure that it's a seamless process from end to end, and then touching on the earlier points, making sure that everything's compliant, and making sure that everything is above board and the money movement is fully licensed, and make sure that it's compliant across every jurisdiction that you're going into.
Okay, well, just on cue, my dogs are barking, which is fantastic right at the end. They always have to make an appearance at some point. So stress at the beginning with technology, stress at the end with dogs. But anyway, but thank you so much for today. I do think there's more we can talk about on payments as we go along. Is there anything that you want to leave people with, Rick, before we finish today's session? Because you've got a lot going on your end, haven't you?
Yeah, one thing I also say is that when you're looking for a partner, make sure security, data management, all of that's really important as well. We didn't really touch on that, but making sure they have they have a secure system, they've got secure processes and procedures within their organization when it comes to data management, data security, and privacy. I think that's important. On that note, as I said, Melanie, we just got our ISO certification. We've got more news for other certifications coming up soon. So that's really good. But if anyone has any questions, I'm really about helping people. That's kind of that's my Achilles heel. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I tend to respond to every LinkedIn. The last time was a lot of them, so it took me about a day or two to get through all of them. But feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions that people have. Free of charge, right? I just want to. My goal is to help people and try to create simplicity. And if Helios can be of help, we are launching in beginning of fourth quarter. So we're super excited about that. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions or would like to see a demo of our phenomenal platform. I'm a little biased here, but if anyone wants to take a look at that, we're happy to have a conversation and see how we can help streamline your contractor pay solution as well.
And I will say, I do know he does get back to people. So it's not, you're not just saying it. But I think Rick's one of the very few entrepreneurs and leaders who genuinely does want to help. And also, like, Rick, I'm sure you're happy to say that you've got the t-shirt, you've done it, and you've seen most situations where you can help people out. So John, really nice to meet you. I hope to see you again on another LinkedIn Live. If you want to get in contact with Rick or John, just as Rick said, contact them on LinkedIn. But we hope to see you next month. So good luck, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.